Welcome to Workplace Wake Up, your go-to podcast for practical employment law guidance. I'm Jennifer Shaw, the founder of Shaw Law Group, and I'm here to help HR professionals and leaders navigate the legal minefields of the modern workplace. Each week, we tackle real-world issues with clear advice and a little tough love. Let's get started. I am so happy to have you here with us, and there is a lot going on in the world, as always. Also, I have been getting a ton of calls about badly behaving employees, and I don't really know what's going on here, but it may just be the summer wiggle woggles or whatever you want to call it, but people are not showing up on time. They are not staying for their full shift. They are misrepresenting their time on timesheets. They are emailing themselves proprietary documents to their home email address. I mean, things are going a little cuckoo. So I thought it would be good for me to give you a little bit of support this first week in August, regardless of where you work or what you're doing. I know the summer can be tough. People take vacations. People have kids out of school. There's just a lot of additional obligations and responsibilities that come with the summertime. But here's the thing. What I've been seeing are not only those performance issues like not coming to work on time or not meeting a deadline or not following a direction, but I'm seeing people who are technically doing their job. If you looked at the job description, they are dotting their I's and crossing their T's, but their behavior is terrible. They are actually poisoning the workplace. And it might be chronic negativity, it might be people's inability to accept constructive feedback, or just outright insubordination. I am not doing it. All of those issues have to be addressed. If you're going to be an employer of choice and you're going to provide a positive, respectful, professional work environment, you have got to address those issues. So I want to talk to you about some tools and some ways for you to address these performance and behavior issues that are direct, that are effective, and will not create legal liability for you. So the first thing I want to talk about is this statement that I get a lot from people. And they say something to me along the lines of, well, Jen, they're a good employee with a bad attitude. And I tell them, that's impossible. You can't be a good employee with a bad attitude. Because what happens is when you have a bad attitude, you are by definition not a good employee. Now, obviously, we're using terms like good and bad, which are very subjective. But here's what I mean. You're not doing your job, okay, if you are constantly undermining leadership, if you're constantly making inappropriate comments, if you're really not collaborating with your coworkers, right? And you all know this. You're listening to this podcast because you know what you're supposed to be doing. You're in HR, you're in legal, you're a business owner. You know the importance of attitude and tone and communication and all of that. But a lot of employees seem to be taking the position right now that, look, I'm doing the technical part of my job. Therefore, let me be who I am. Right? If I have an attitude, I have an attitude. If I get frustrated, I get to display that frustration in whatever way I think is appropriate. If I don't like something, I'm going to be the first person to tell you because you want me to be open and you want me to be transparent and you want me to tell it like it is. Well, we kind of do and we kind of don't. Because the bottom line is we expect people to behave appropriately at work. And as you know, just like in a dating relationship, people are on their best behavior, right? When they're new to the relationship, and then it's downhill from there. I was dating someone who used to call me on Sunday mornings when he was going to get his coffee, and he would say, hey, hun, do you want to have a hot chocolate? Well, that went on for about, 3 or 4 months. And then all of a sudden, I wasn't getting my hot chocolate. And so I said to him, well, hey, I'm just wondering, what happened with the hot chocolate? And he literally says to me, oh, that was so much work, but I wanted to be on my best behavior in the beginning. Okay, I get it. That's what employees do, right? You come on time. In fact, you take the position that being early is actually on time. And you worry about what you're wearing, and you comb your hair, and you do all of those things. I think what's happening is there are a number of employees who feel like they're doing us favors, right? I'm doing you a favor by coming to work. I'm doing you a favor by doing this thing that you hired me to do. So don't demand too much from me. Okay, don't think that I'm also going to do it with a smile on my face. Don't think I'm also going to have a good attitude, because that is not going to happen. And I don't know where it's coming from. I don't know what the source is. I'm not about to say it's generational or, it's because they're new graduates or whatever. Those are just stereotypes, and I just don't buy it. But there is something going on. I know for me personally, I'm feeling pretty drained by what's going on in the world. And so I probably don't have as much patience as I would normally have for things that go on at work. And I probably don't have a positive attitude 100% of the time, which is really what I expect from myself, because I'm just getting worn down by all the things that we're dealing with, all of the horrible things that are happening in the world. I know we all have different political viewpoints, and that's fine. I'm not here to preach to anybody about what should be happening. But if you are upset one way or the other about what is going on, it is sometimes hard to focus on work. And I think what we need to do is remind our employees, when we evaluate you, we don't only evaluate you on the 12 responsibilities that are listed in your duty statement or your job description. It also matters how you do it, your attitude, your behavior, your communication style. They make a difference. So when we're talking about, hey, how are we going to get our employees to understand the value of appropriate workplace behavior? Number one, we've got to model it ourselves, right? Which I am far from perfect in doing, but I certainly have that as a goal. Number two, you've got to let them know what your expectations actually are. We have to remember that employees do not have a crystal ball. They do not have ESP. They do not know what we expect of them. Number three, you have to be fair and consistent, which can be difficult because we all know there are employees who we like a lot and employees who we're not so hot about. And that's just how it is. Now, in my firm, I love everybody equally. But I know that's not the case for every workplace, right? We have really good employees who work really hard. And so it's easy for me to treat everyone fairly and professionally because I like them all. But that's not always the case. I'm lucky. I have a small organization. Particularly if you're in a larger organization, that can be a lot harder to do. So that fairness and consistency is critical. And then the other thing you have to do is you have to worry about not violating the law. As I told you in the beginning of the podcast here this morning, I want to help you figure out a way to do this, a way to hold people accountable without creating legal liability, okay? And we're going to do that in a couple of different ways. First thing you got to do is have policies and procedures. And you know this, and I've talked about this ad nauseum, but I still talk to people who have been our clients for a long time who say to me, oh, I know I'm supposed to have a policy. I know I got to do a handbook. Folks, it's the minimum you got to do. Okay, you got to put something in writing so people understand what it is. Now, do you have to be careful? Sure. You've all heard of the National Labor Relations Board, right? They interpret the National Labor Relations Act, which is a federal law passed in the 1930s to give employees the right to talk about their workplace, the right to collectively bargain for their mutual interest, okay? So can you put in your handbook, you must always be respectful and professional? Well, you got to be careful. You got to carve out union activity. You've got to write these policies in a way that doesn't negatively impact your employees' rights, okay? That's important, but there's a way to do it. There's always a way to do it. We can always create policies that have the protections, but also set the expectations. So that's the first thing we have to do. The second thing we have to do, folks, is you have got to train the frontline supervisors. You've got to make sure that people understand what it means to hold their employees accountable. How do you write a performance improvement plan? How do you write an expectations memo? What do you do during a one-on-one meeting? How do you figure out how to motivate an employee who just doesn't seem to be very motivated or doesn't seem to be doing what you need them to do? All of these issues are very doable. They're very simple as long as you've got a policy and you let people know what the expectations are. There are two levels of expectations, right? One is the policy, which applies to everybody. And then there's this training component where you're saying to your frontline managers and supervisors, this is what I need you to do. Okay, the third thing you have to do is think. So here's an example. Your employee reported a workers' compensation claim yesterday. Before you investigate it, the manager wants to fire them for having a bad attitude. Are you going to do that right away? No. You're going to talk to the manager about the bad attitude. You're going to look into that issue. You're probably going to talk to the employee. You still may fire them. I am in no way saying that just because somebody made a workers' compensation claim, you can't fire them. But let's be smart about it. Let's make sure we know what actually happened. Let's make sure that there's nothing else going on under the surface that we need to look at, right? So I want you to be smart. I want you to think. And then if you need to use your external resources or your in-house counsel, if you're lucky enough to have them on your team, give them a buzz, reach out, call a friend, right? Say, hey, this is my situation. I want to make sure it sounds okay to you. And the last thing I want you to do is put on your plaintiff's lawyer hat. Think about, how will this look to a plaintiff's lawyer? Am I doing something that seems shady? Am I doing something that doesn't seem transparent? Am I holding somebody accountable to something that I don't know enough about? Am I holding somebody accountable to an expectation that I haven't properly explained or I haven't properly fleshed out? So when we're looking at accountability for behavior, you have to remember that we are not all the same, right? So this idea of the golden rule is not going to work. You can't tell everyone, treat people the way you want to be treated. You know what? I like humor in the workplace. I'm not easily offended. So I would love to have a little more going on in the workplace that was kind of probably on the line because it's just fun and it's engaging and it makes the day go by quickly. But I can't do that. Just because I'm not easily offended doesn't mean that other people don't have different sensibilities. And it's not a judgment. It's not one way is better than the other way. It's all about allowing people to come to work and earn a living. Remember, that's the only reason they come to work. If you told them, I'm not paying you, but I'd still like you to come, you would be hard pressed to get any of your employees to show up. Okay? So they're coming to get paid. That doesn't mean they don't like their job. That doesn't mean they're not committed. That doesn't mean they don't want to do a good job. But that's why they're showing up. So you've got to make sure that you create an environment and a situation where they can get that done. And when somebody has a negative attitude or they are constantly tearing down other people, tearing down the organization, that is contagious. And it can be the demise of an entire organization if you don't get it under control. Because a few bad apples can ruin the whole bunch, baby, right? You know that. You've seen that in your career. So I want to empower you to do your homework up front and then not be afraid to put the hammer down. Not be afraid to say, hey, I've given you warning. I've treated you fairly. I've done what I needed to do here, and you didn't make it. I thought you could do it. You thought you could do it, and we were both wrong. If you're constantly living in the fear of being sued, right? Which of course is a perfectly legitimate fear. But the fact of the matter is you can do everything 110% correctly and still get sued for an employment law issue. So your only motivation cannot be, I don't want to get sued, right? Because there are a lot of other things that happen before you get sued. And even if you do get sued, that can negatively affect productivity, can negatively affect the environment, can cause your clients and your vendors and your customers not to want to do business with you. So when you think about how am I going to hold these people accountable, is it okay for me to tell them, yeah, you're doing the nuts and bolts of what I hired you to do, but your attitude stinks, your behavior's not good, and I don't like it, and it's got to change? You bet. Not only can you do it, you must do it, because if you don't, you will lose people who have good attitudes and are getting the work done. You will lose those people who don't want to be part of that environment. So think about what you're going to do. Follow the steps we've outlined here this morning and go out and get it done. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining me. Have a great day. Workplace Wake Up, including our guests and hosts, do not provide legal advice in this podcast. Do not act upon any of the information discussed in this podcast without first consulting a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Workplace Wake Up. If you found today's discussion helpful, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share the podcast with your HR and leadership teams. For more insights, training programs, and legal updates, you can visit us at shawlawgroup.com.